Hey there, and welcome to the Systems Alliance. My name is Jaxie, and in this video, I want to go over the disastrous launch of BioWare and EA's new game Anthem, and what exactly it means for the future of BioWare. Will they continue to exist, or will EA shut them down? So first, let's start out with the actual launch of Anthem, and it goes back basically to the demo. And when that came out, it really just wasn't working. I mean, there's no other way around it. The game simply couldn't be played because you kept being kicked offline, and a lot of people were saying, oh, that's what happens. You know, they just didn't expect that many people, but when that started happening, that worried me. And the reason it worried me is because this is Electronic Arts we're talking about. So yeah, all the bad stuff aside, they do have a ton of money. I mean, they are one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable, video game company out there. So when you're looking at servers, that's something that they should be able to accommodate. You know, it's one thing if the actual game is bad, but if people can't even play the game, I don't care if it's a demo, you know, pre-release anything, the actual game, you have to be able to play it. And this is a AAA launch, so this isn't some free-to-play game. This isn't some, you know, non-AAA title by a really small studio that doesn't have the backing of, one, a big developer like BioWare and a big publisher like EA. So that worried me right off the bat. A lot of people were making excuses for EA. Myself, I was worried. You know, if they can't get that right, what else are they going to get wrong? And unfortunately, connectivity still seems to be one of the main issues in the game. People are still being kicked off. People are still having to restart their computers or whatever they're having to restart. It's just having major issues. And this is something that, one, should have been pushed back. You know, if you couldn't get it out in time, it should have been pushed back. And this is classic EA right here and kind of classic BioWare. So if you look at all of BioWare's great games in the past, they were pretty much all delayed. And they were delayed, why? Because they needed a little bit more time to be polished with, who knows, maybe it was stuff like that, maybe it was different stuff, but they needed a little bit more time. Now, ever since EA has taken over, they don't give their developers any more time. They want to get this out in the quarter that they want to get it out in, and it's been costing them. First, it happened with Dragon Age 2. So Dragon Age Origins, amazing game. Dragon Age 2 comes along, the game is unfinished. You know, that bothered a lot of people. And then you have Mass Effect 3. Now, Mass Effect 3, great game. They didn't quite finish it, though. And on launch, they had day one DLC and stuff like that. And that rubbed people the wrong way, too, as it should have. I think Dragon Age Inquisition went off pretty well. I know the older generation consoles had some issues, but it was mainly for new generation console and PC. So I think that went okay. And it had some great DLC. But then you go back to Mass Effect Andromeda, and that game wasn't ever finished at any point. I mean, the whole thing was a complete disaster. A lot of it was because BioWare had their B team working on it, because supposedly their A team was working on Anthem, but more on that later. And it just didn't come out well at all. And just to put that in perspective, Mass Effect Andromeda on Metacritic has a user score of 4.9, and its actual score from critics hovers in the low 70s to mid 70s. So, and video game critics tend to be not nearly as harsh as movie critics, so something in the 70s is not good at all. I mean, really, any AAA title is usually able to get somewhere in the 80s, and I mean, you look at the old games they had, I mean, a ton of stuff in the 90s, so very, very disappointing. So, okay, that was the B team. They messed up, but what did EA do with the B team? They shut them down. EA shut that studio down and absorbed them because they made one mistake, and apparently Andromeda was even profitable for them. So even though it was a subpar game and it disappointed a lot of gamers, it still made money for EA. So you would think, oh, okay, well, let's work with them, you know, have them work on something else. Nope, shut down. So now with, quote, the A team working on Anthem, you would think it would have turned out better. But right now, its user score is sitting at 4 even, so even below Andromeda, who had much higher expectations because the audience you're dealing with is used to Mass Effect games. And the critic score is 60 right now, 6-0. I mean, we're talking at least 30 points below where a BioWare game is expected to be at. And it goes back to the development. we kept hearing things during development like, oh, all of a sudden it's not going to have as much story. And, they're saying, well, no, it's still going to have story. We're trying to merge story and the gameplay like this into one. It's never been done before. Well, it looks like it still hasn't been done because the story, basically until you get to the end game is where all the story is. But as you're going there, there's really not much at all. And it's kind of sad. The biggest complaint I'm hearing from people is, why am I playing this game? The graphics look great, so at least they got that right. The graphics are amazing. So, okay, great graphics, third person, you can see yourself. That's a big thing in a game like this. So that's pretty cool. Obviously, Andromeda had a whole bunch of issues with their graphics, but BioWare's comes with the story. That's why you make a BioWare game. That's why EA, if you're going to a studio and you want a great story, you go to BioWare. But when you don't let BioWare do a good story and you make them do a multiplayer game, which that's not their strong suit. BioWare is not known for multiplayer. They had one success in multiplayer. That's it. And that's Mass Effect 3's multiplayer. And that was just an add-on to a game. And it was basically like a Gears of War Horde mode or Call of Duty, zombie mode, something like that. It wasn't even that was just a throwaway game, right? So now you have an actual game that's supposed to be full multiplayer from BioWare. It doesn't surprise me that they weren't able to deliver it that well. And on the flip side, when you're really thinking about it, the first Destiny wasn't that great. Destiny 2 pretty much bombed. The Division wasn't that great. The only half-decent ones are the free-to-play ones, like, say, a Warframe, but those don't have what you would expect from a AAA title to begin with. So really, there hasn't been a lot of these open-world shooter-looter type games that have really taken off and given people everything that they wanted, because clearly it's not cost prohibitive to put in a great, Mass Effect, BioWare type story into a game and then also have all this development, with the servers and the multiplayer and the shooting and looting and everything like that for tons of people. It just doesn't seem to work out that well. And BioWare is supposed to be working on the new Dragon Age game. I mean, they actually are right now. They're working on a new Dragon Age game, though it wouldn't surprise me if they had to take a bunch of resources off of that and put them back into Anthem to make that game playable, I guess, in terms of going into the future. Because right now, it seems like people are playing it, it's all right, but there's no reason to go back to it. So after they're finished, they're putting it down. And it's a live service game for EA, so it's literally the last thing that EA wants. Because if they do that, they're not going to get their $1 billion. And speaking of $1 billion, the sales expectations for Anthem, according to EA, this is before the reviews came in, they're expecting this game to sell somewhere between 5 and 6 million copies, which $60 a pop. And this is just through the end of March that they're expecting this number. So very short time frame from the actual launch. Now, of course, that was the other problem. They had kind of multiple launches, but that's somewhere between $300 and $360 million in about a week and a half, 2 weeks, however you want to put it. So that's not too bad, but the problem is to get to $1 billion for the entire year, that game has to stick around. People have to keep playing it, and they have to basically purchase microtransactions. And not only that, the biggest part is the game has to be good enough for hardcore gamer fans to recommend to their friends. And right now, I'm not seeing that at all. Anthem definitely seems to be hitting towards the more casual audiences. You look at the advertisement, the advertising on this game is very heavy. I was watching ESPN and all of a sudden an Anthem ad comes up. I don't remember seeing that stuff nearly as much for, say, a Dragon Age or a Mass Effect. It's like it's me starting to think, okay, this game is supposed to be big for EA, and they're relying on it very, very heavily. And luckily for EA, they randomly surprised everyone and put out Apex. But that's another video, so more on that later. But just focusing on Anthem, this was supposed to be their big game. So why am I worried about the future of BioWare in EA's hands with a possible disaster if Anthem doesn't sell well? Well, just take a look at what happened with Visceral Games and EA. Visceral Games made amazing games. They had the Dead Space series. I mean, that's huge. Highly rated games, great selling games. So what did EA do? They put them on a Star Wars project, and they were working on this awesome Star Wars game. But guess what? EA looked at that and said, I'm not sure we can make $1 billion on this Star Wars game. And granted, Star Wars is the biggest IP in the world, and Anthem is a new property, so when you think about it, they're not comparable that way so much, but EA was really heavily towards this games as a live service type thing, and this Star Wars game being developed by Visceral Games didn't fit that, and so not only did they cancel the game for Visceral, they shut the entire studio down because that's not what they wanted. And so all of a sudden, you're not getting any more Dead Space games, you're not getting any of this stuff, they're shut down. So granted, BioWare, a larger studio than Visceral Games, but what does that mean for BioWare? If this game doesn't sell well, I mean, obviously it's not being reviewed well, but if it doesn't sell well, are they getting shut down too? It's very possible with EA at the helm because, one, they've done it so many times in the past. I mean, you could just go online and look at all the studios that EA has acquired and then shut down. And really, I think EA is doing themselves a disservice by doing this because they're losing talent, they're losing ideas. If they allowed these companies, these developers, to make the games that they bought them for, they might have something, but that's not EA's style. It seems to be just shut the studio down if we can't make all the money in the world on it. So that's why I'm worried about BioWare's future. And here's another reason. Granted, EA has owned BioWare and clearly been a large part of the reason why the last few BioWare games have not been too great. But BioWare games not being great, that's not a good thing. I mean, let's think about this for a minute here. BioWare was hit after hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. And it was only once EA acquired them that they had their first misstep with Dragon Age 2, but made up for it with some good DLC that was right during the transition. EA, as we know, just forced BioWare to shove Dragon Age 2 out the door, even though it wasn't finished, but it wasn't terrible, it just was unfinished. And so then the next game, Mass Effect 3, that was a pretty good game. Didn't live up to the best game ever standards of Mass Effect 2 or Mass Effect 1, but that's a pretty lofty goal, so Mass Effect 3, still great game. And then Inquisition, another very solid game. I would say a very, very good game. I don't know if it was as good as Dragon Age Origins or the Mass Effects, but a very, very good game. But then Mass Effect Andromeda comes along, and that's when EA came along and said, okay, we have the A team working on Anthem. BioWare, we want your B team working on Andromeda. Even though it's a Mass Effect project, you would think you would want your A team with all your writers, all your creators, all the people who brought you the Mass Effect universe working on the next Mass Effect game. And so it looks like they mismatched here. Maybe they should have had a B team that didn't need to be so great in story or anything like that working on Anthem, because clearly the A team couldn't make a game that worked very well. And then at least you would have had your A team on a Mass Effect game and it would have turned out better than Andromeda. We'll obviously never know, but this is just not looking good because you have 2 games in a row that not only fans are very disappointed about, but critics also didn't really like. So what does that tell you about the studio? I mean, they've never done this before, but all of a sudden, now that EA's got their hands in them, they're turning out a poor product. And who would have thought that with BioWare? So let me know your thoughts about all of this. Where do you think Anthem's going to end up critic-wise? Can they fix the game? You know, right now it's sitting at 60 for the Metacritic score and 4 for a user score. Can they actually fix the game? Because honestly, I don't think it's any better or worse than Destiny. And that had a much higher score. I think now we're just at a point where people's expectations are that it won't be like Destiny. I think if Destiny came out now, it'd get a very similar score, but I think people are just fed up and their expectations are, give us a good game, because we're through giving people passes. And people are still giving EA and BioWare passes. They're like, oh, the game will get better once they finish adding stuff. So it's yet another incomplete game. Can they fix it? Let me know what your thoughts are on that down in the comment section below. Do you think they can fix it? Is that possible? I think it is possible, but the problem is it didn't launch in a completed state. The other question is, how much do you think it's going to sell? Because 5 and 6 million copies, that was the prediction that EA had for their own sales pre these reviews coming out. That equals $300 to $360 million. Do you think they're going to hit that mark by the end of March? And what do you think they do for the next 12 months? Do you think they can hit $1 billion? Or is this game going to kind of fizzle out? And then let me know your thoughts on the future of BioWare. Do you think they're going to be able to survive the wrath of EA? Or is EA going to even be mad at them? I know EA tends to blame the developer and shut him down, but I really don't know in this case. I mean, this is not a BioWare game. This should have been a different studio, but BioWare's on it. So let me know your thoughts on all of this. Leave a comment down in the comment section below. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, hit me up on Twitter, and we'll catch you next time.